Yeah, thanks. And thanks to the Regional Independents and Deputy Naughton for bringing forward this important motion on this critically important subject of the development of our offshore wind energy resources. And I think there's absolutely no doubt that we need to develop and develop quickly our renewable energy resources, and a key part of that will be our offshore wind capacity, particularly given the huge size of our maritime area, our geographical location. We are well placed to play our part in moving ourselves away from fossil fuel energy, which we know is threatening the sustainability of life on our planet is an existential crisis, and so it is absolutely critical. And we also know, of course, that there's a major problem in terms of energy, the availability of energy generally, and the cost of it, which we've seen ratchet up in a very, very dramatic way, impacting hugely financially on many people who can least afford it. So there's a lot at stake at this, and I think there's a lot of very, very good points in this motion. I think first of all, just the simple fact that we have to discuss the detail of this is terribly important, because I think there's a lot to discuss, and often we have been quite general, I think, in our approach to these issues, and this is an attempt to get serious about the discussion. I think it is absolutely right, and I really want to elaborate on this point, to call out the danger of a developer-led approach to developing our maritime area. And I want to talk about that in a bit more in a second. But just to say other positive things about the motion, I think the focus on, if you like, how this can facilitate more regional balanced development, balanced regional development to benefit other parts of the country, not just everything being concentrated in Dublin. I think that's a very strong point, which we need to take very, very seriously, because we do have imbalanced development in this country, and that needs to be addressed. I think also the issue of community gain or social benefit. I'd rather like to put it as a social benefit from the development of our marine resources and our energy resources is all critically important. So well done to Dennis and the Regional Independents for doing that. However, I do also think there's a number of questions that need to be answered, and I don't have all the answers in this regard, and I think these issues need to be discussed. But as someone who spent a lot of time on the Marine Area Planning Bill recently, and Deputy Whitmore was alluding to this and put in a lot of amendments, I have major concerns about the development-led approach, the developer-led approach. We know that a developer-led approach to development onshore was not good. And often led to the wrong types of developments in the wrong places, not properly regulated, and that, at its worst, did extreme economic damage to this country and precipitated the greatest economic crash we ever saw. It didn't particularly produce cheaper housing in that case. Housing got more expensive. It did environmental damage and so on. Or to address onshore wind, what we do not need is repetition of Derry Bryan. We don't need that. And if you don't do proper environmental impact assessment, trying to sort of meet the imperative of developing renewable energy, you can cut off your nose to spite your face. So, Cuilcha, give over a mountain, cut down the forests to build wind energy, and the mountain falls down because nobody had done the proper assessment, and we're still paying heavy fines for it. Or what has happened in Donegal recently, we still don't know the full cost impact environmentally or financially that could have. And I find it deeply concerning that the Wind Energy Association that have been mentioned here today in a number of cases, and indeed some of their arguments being used, are explicitly arguing in their documents on development of the offshore renewable resources, they are arguing against a plan-led approach, explicitly. They are arguing explicitly for a developer-led approach. Now, of course, why wouldn't they do that? They're commercial corporate interests. They're interested in making money. And so we shouldn't just assume, just because what they're doing is building wind turbines, that somehow they have a more benign attitude towards the potential impact of what they do to the environment when money is the imperative. So I am deeply concerned that they are explicitly arguing for that approach and that we do not bend to that approach. I am particularly worried, given our previous record around failing to comply with environmental directives for onshore development, that we have only just over 2% of our marine area designated for marine protection, when Germany, I think, has 45%, France is about 45%, most countries in Europe have far more, and indeed where EU directives explicitly require us to have that network of marine protected areas, to have an ecosystem approach. And let's be clear about this, right? Biodiversity and protection of biodiversity and addressing the biodiversity crisis cannot be the poor relation of addressing the climate crisis, because the biggest carbon sink, bar none, is the marine. Right? So we can't afford to destroy the marine, supposedly in the name of addressing the climate crisis, because we will actually sabotage our own efforts to address the climate crisis and potentially do damage to the marine. So that cannot be allowed to happen. I also think we need to discuss, and again, I don't know all the answers, but we need to discuss in detail the question of the viability of further offshore floating wind, which is referenced, fair play, in this motion, where potentially there can be less impact on communities, but we get all the benefits, and also where you have even slightly increased costs can be counteracted, if you like, by the fact that there's greater availability of wind further out at sea, and indeed where floating offshore wind is being developed in Scotland and a number of places, in Japan, in the United States, in Maine, in Portugal, and so on. And I hear officials saying, well, it'll be a few years before we can do that here. I don't really accept that, and I want to know more about it, because what I don't like is the fact that the major sites which are earmarked for development at the moment, potentially bypassing the need for protected marine areas, the so-called relevant projects, are sites that have been selected by the developers themselves, without having that proper environmental screening and marine protection that we are required to have. So my time is up, but so I commend the motion, but I do think it has to be the beginning of a much more in-depth, detailed conversation about how we balance the imperative to develop our offshore renewable energy while at the same time protecting our precious marine resources.
Thank you.